and welcome back to the Training Babble Podcast. I'm your host, Dave Schell, and today we're doing another training check-in with Dr. Phil. Phil,
Dave,
how's it going?
Thanks for having me back, man. It's been a year since we talked. Had to drop it in there, especially after you just introduced that Happy New Year, everybody. So
that's right.
That'll be the last one I do for this year.
And then I'll post this in October or something like that.
Right.
So if you haven't been following along, we've been doing a bit of an experiment where I've been kind of consulting Phil on some of his training as he prepares for an uphill running race. And then one of his goals was to hold 400 watts for 5 minutes. And we've actually already achieved that this past week. And so that's pretty amazing. And so, yeah, I think let's just start by giving a very broad overview of kind of what the trainings look like at this point and how long it's been.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to rewind just a little bit. So initially I was like, I think I'm going to be doing this race in May and those sort of things. And I hadn't signed up yet. And then I think over the last 2-3 weeks, the registration actually opened up, and I've been feeling fairly confident in terms of, like my fitness and other things like that. So I signed up for it. So it's
Nice.
It's officially on the books.
Good.
I don't know the exact dates in May, but it's the Tiger Claw Ascent, and it's going to be really fun. It's going to be 2.5 miles with 2,500 feet of gain. So it's essentially 20% elevation, or 20% incline the entire time.
Yeah.
And the first mile is 1,500 feet of gain. So it's 30 or 40%. So it's going to be brutal. And I'm really lucky because I have, that big hill in the back. Mm-hmm. And now I just bought an industrial grade treadmill that goes up to 40% incline.
Oh, good. Yeah.
So it was one of those things where for my physiology testing business, I wanted to get a treadmill. And then it just so happened that somebody was, selling one of these commercial Nordic track ones for, really, really deeply discounted. And I was okay. So I got it. Didn't realize it was 500 pounds and had to essentially get four extremely fit, strong friends to come all the way up to my house, which is 45 minutes into the middle of nowhere, to, help lift the treadmill and get it all situated. And if I ever move, I don't know what I'm going to do with the treadmill because it was a beast to put in and install.
Yeah. Comes with the house now.
Yeah, exactly. It'll be a little extra add-on. So somebody who is fit will have to buy the house after us. But the way that we've been setting up my training is, Monday, VO2 Max work for trail running, and that's the hill that we were talking about. Essentially, it's 0.3 miles and 300 feet of gain, and it takes me anywhere between 4 and 6 minutes to do it, depending on if I'm doing 1 rep or if I'm doing upwards of 4 reps. And then I just walk/jog all the way back down. It's about even rest, but it's more important to get in my opinion, it's more important to do the work than it is to have perfectly equal work-rest ratios, especially for something like this.
And I think that's a good place to kind of pause real quick because you being a physiologist and people hearing VO2 work, VO2 max work, right? It's not like you're out there. It's not like you're measuring lactate, or it's not like you've got your VO2 master on as you're doing this and making sure it's we've been working a lot off of RPE, and we know that people can typically hold their VO2 max between 3 and 8 minutes. And so you're just going hard for 3 to 5 minutes and then easy to a point where you can repeat it. And you're not down there, counting the seconds, I can't go again until I hit here. It's just are you ready to go again so that you can put in an equal effort? As a previous rep.
Yeah, and the reason why, in the lab, right, you have the equal work-rest ratios is just because that's just a really easy way of stimulating VO2 max and then recovering enough to be able to keep that quality high. So the way that I view it is it's better almost to take a little bit extra rest to keep the quality really high because I'm attaining more time at or near VO2 max by doing that as opposed to running back down the hill, which is a crazy eccentric movement that's actually kind of tiring, and then immediately hitting it and then all of a sudden going 30, 40 seconds slower. So my goal is to try to either negative split or stay kind of even within those those uphill splits and then just rest until necessary. And what's funny is dogs don't know how to pace themselves very well. So we'll do like the first interval and all 4 of my dogs will go with me and they'll be ahead of me. And then by the third interval, they're all, barely getting across the finish line. Yeah. And it's just funny because they are too getting a really, really good workout, and it's been really good for them. So they're my running partners, and it motivates me to keep going even when I'm super tired. I'm like, okay, beat the dogs. We can beat the dogs after 2 or 3 intervals. Here we go.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. That's awesome. And so that was the other thing. And I also want to bring into when you and I first talked, and I think we had this on the last podcast too. I kind of mentioned that when I first talked to an athlete, like we're always looking for the limiters or the low hanging fruit. And for you, it was staying healthy.
Yes.
And what your pattern had kind of been is that like trying to hit that progressive overload and adding work like every week or, like more time, higher intensity, more intervals, whatever. Mm-hmm. And so for us, it's just, and that's why the reason I bring this up is this is the reason you were hesitant to sign up for the race is because like when we first talked, it's like, will you be healthy for it?
Yeah.
And so that was our first job. And so, yeah, I think that's been really encouraging is that the way we've done it is like, rather than pile on work every week, it's just like, okay, let's give your body time to adapt to it and then do more work.
Yeah. And I think the cool thing about RPE based reps, so like having like a set distance that you're covering, and then going by RPE is it gives you the wiggle room to be like, oh, well, I feel like shit today, so I'm going to go a little bit slower. Or I feel really good today. Let's see what we can do. Yeah. And kind of, like riding that line between. And that's actually, I've been thinking a lot about that lately because it's been something that's really, I think, helped me. And it also helps me to monitor progress. So even though we aren't increasing, like volume massively, I'm still improving on like my ability to do 3 of these reps. Like, for example, the first time I did one of these VO2 Max workouts, it was just 2 reps up the hill. Yeah. And I think I barely got like 5 minutes and 45 seconds or something like that. Now I regularly go under 5 minutes and I can do 3 reps in a row. And then yesterday I just did 4 reps in a row and I did like right around 5 minutes the entire time. And that was after lifting, like, kind of doing like power cleans for like 60 bales of hay that my fiance needed me to move. So I was also kind of fatigued from that. And I feel good. Like I don't feel like, I feel like if I pushed it a little bit too hard, one more day, then my back might be like, but I know that because tomorrow I have, a zone 2 day coming up. I'm like, okay, well, my Achilles is kind of, a little tweaky right now. So I'm just going to walk and it's just going to be, pure like kind of recovery day, get out, feel good, because it's more important to me to stay consistent than to get, like a little bit better on my zone 2, for example.
Right.
And man, I tell you what, my fitness is crazy in terms of essentially only running 2, maybe 3 times a week. And what we didn't say is that, so I follow up my Monday VO2 Max workouts with the Tuesday VO2 Max style bike ride. Yeah. And something that I had switched up just a little bit towards the end of the last block was I wanted to do hard start intervals where I tried to, jack up the wattage to above 400, hold it for a minute, and then kind of ease into, something a little bit lower. Yeah. First time I did that, failed pretty spectacularly. Got to like the second or the third rep, and it's just like, nope, this isn't happening. Same thing happened today because I tried to extend the 400 that I did from 1 minute to minute 30. First 2 reps were fine. Second rep, I got through the minute 30, and I was just like, yep, I'm done for today. I'm feeling pretty tired. So yeah. But again, it's like I take all of these as learning lessons and actually wins in the sense of I didn't feel like I had to, try to, push my way through this last rep because I already got 2 reps in and they were good quality reps at, 400 watts for 90 seconds. And, and I was feeling tired at the same time. So, like those are all things that I've really been working through. And not only is my, my running up the hill fitness getting better, I went from 4 minutes and 37 seconds was my fastest ever up the hill. And then last week I retested it and I hit 4:07.
Yeah.
So it was a 30-second PR.
Yeah.
And I'm playing with this idea like, oh, maybe I could actually run the entire hill. I've gotten about halfway up. That's been the farthest I've gotten up. But I think for this next block, I'm going to try, to do a little bit more of that stress where it's like run and kind of pace myself in terms of running as far up the hill as I can possibly get, and just like try to start to switch from power hiking to a little bit more running, just to get a little bit more of that like economy, involvement. But not only is my running getting better, my cycling's also getting better. I PR'd on my 5-minute all-out test, went from 389 last time we tested to 403. I think like on Training Peaks it says like 400 even or something like that because it didn't start exactly. Yeah. But on my C2 Biker it says 403. So I was so pumped at that, man. Like,
no, that's significant. I mean,
yeah,
that's huge. And I think just to go back a little bit, I think the important thing here that you were kind of highlighting is doing the quality reps, right? It's like, and that's what's hard to measure a lot of times. And so like, that's what doesn't show up in your peak power or your peak times and stuff like that. But it's like able to do more reps is huge. And that's what's going to matter into a race when you're getting tired and stuff like that. And so I think being able to see that progress as well, not just like how fast you're going up the hill, but being able to repeat that over and over again.
Yeah,
super important.
Yeah, that's kind of my idea right now is, the race is going to be between like the fastest guys go 27 minutes or something, which is just absolutely absurd. And then, like the kind of middle of the pack would be like 45, 50 minutes. So anywhere between 30 and 50 minutes is kind of the target. And I'll get closer to knowing what I'm capable of as I start to do more sport specifics or, like race specific simulations closer to the race. But I think as of right now, continuing to build out those repetitions going up the hill is going to be really useful because eventually they're going to kind of change away from VO2 max.
That's what I was just thinking.
With more and more reps, it becomes more threshold. So it's almost one of those things where it's like, well, let's just keep adding more reps until it's more of a threshold workout compared to a VO2 max workout. And then that's like an automatic sort of sport specific thing that it changes into.
Exactly. And so what that might look like is one, you're not running them as hard. So you're backing off the effort just a little bit and then maybe shortening the recovery as well. But that might be harder as you're running downhill or whatever. But it's like, that's exactly what I was thinking. It's like, okay, so we've had like 12 weeks of essentially VO2 max work, right? And a lot of times people would say like, oh, you do a block of 4 weeks or whatever, but it's like, but if you keep progressing, you've got time. We saw this during COVID. It's like all of a sudden you had all this time to train. It's like, great, we've got all this runway now. So let's just like keep hitting it until it stops progressing.
And my VO2 max has also gone up like 10%.
That's what I was really curious about. Yeah. So you've also, like you've done the field test.
Yep.
But then you've also been wearing the VO2 Master and the Moxie and stuff like that. And so like what changed?
Yeah. So
you saw the global power, but then like what, like physiologically?
Yeah, it's really wild. I think everybody, kind of, equates changes to VO2 max and direct changes in power, and that's absolutely not true. So my VO2 max has gone up, seemingly gone up 10%, which is like, that's massive, especially because my VO2 max was already like, mid 70s, just because I'm fairly inefficient, just because I'm not in the saddle, 30,000 miles a year, those sort of things. But VO2 max being in the 70s, it went up to almost 80, up to this last time I measured it.
Yeah. So real quick, like, are you measuring it on the bike or are you measuring it on the treadmill? Both. And is it different in those places?
It's both now and it's the same. So
what about when you first started?
So I didn't have a treadmill, so I wasn't doing running VO2 max.
That would have been really interesting.
I know, which is like, I'm really bummed that I didn't have a treadmill, but now I do. So, now it's going to be the same. So we'll talk about the treadmill assessment that I do in just a second. But yeah, so now I have kind of multiple markers. I do my 5-minute bike, and I wear the VO2 Master for that. And I see, what's my VO2 max, what's my average power, what's my heart rate, those sort of things. My VO2 max, like I said, has gone up about 10%, which is really, really crazy, over the course of the last 6 weeks. And I'll have to look back and see what the first time it was, but I think it's even higher, compared to where it was. We know my run VO2 max has had to have gone up because I went from 437 to 407 going up the hill. Yeah. So at least from a performance perspective, that's happening. And then, probably VO2 max is going up as well. And then I do a 3-1 test on the bike. And what's interesting about that is because there's accumulated fatigue leading up to, the end of the test. The first time I did it, I was only able to get up to 350 watts in terms of my max power output. This time I got up to 360 because I started, I think I started at 50 watts the first time and I started at 60 watts this time. So It was like a 10 watt difference, but I was able to get a little bit higher. And my VO2 max in that case is a little bit lower just because it's directly correlated with how many watts you can actually put out. Right. I don't know. I don't use VO2 max at the end of a 3-1 test as like a primary outcome just because I feel like the 5-minute test is more indicative of that. And the number's higher, so it's just more fun to talk about.
Exactly. Got to get those vanity watts.
Yeah, exactly. But I could go back and I could say, okay, well, like it was, say 70, for the 360 that I did, and before that it was like 68 or something along those lines. It's just another comparator. But then I did a run VO2 max test, and because I have the treadmill that can go up to 40% grade, and I know that I'm going to essentially need to run 5 miles an hour in order to get like 30 minutes, for example, like during this race. I do the test and I just ramp up to 5 miles an hour, and then I just start climbing a steeper and steeper hill. And my goal is to just see how far I can get in terms of how steep, the actual hill can get. So this time I got up to 24%, and that was equivalent of like an average of like 82 milliliters per kilogram per minute. So I'm fairly confident, that at least the VO2 Master is consistent in measuring my VO2 max day to day, whether or not it's a little bit higher or lower compared to, like lab-based carts or other things like that. It doesn't really matter because I'm just trying to check if I'm, improving or not, and, and to what extent I'm actually improving. So that's really the big thing. And then with the 3-1 test and then the running incline, treadmill test, I'm looking for zones. And I haven't analyzed my most recent 3-1 test, but my first one, my zone 2 like boundary was like 210 watts. And for this one, and then my second threshold boundary was 290 watts, something along those lines. And I think it's just like, it's either, 200 watts and 280 or 300 watts. It's something kind of close to that.
Yeah. So I'm just looking at it, and just based on my assessment, I asked you if you thought it was 200 and 280, because that's where I was kind of seeing it.
Oh, were you? I thought you were asking about the assessment that you did.
No, I'm saying in the workout comment that you didn't receive a notification.
I didn't look at that because
you sent me that second test.
Yeah, you sent me that fit file
this morning.
Right, and I analyzed that for you.
Correct.
So that's where my numbers were coming from.
Yeah, I'm talking about the test you did. I left you a comment on January 4th saying.
Yeah, I didn't see it. I'm
an awful 200
athlete.
And 280. Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, so 200 and 280, which again, like the focus is really development of VO2 max, so that number is going up, and the other numbers aren't going down because like I said, I changed the starting wattage just slightly. Yeah. So.
And I like that brings up, I mean, this could be its own podcast, and I know that we're going to talk about this a little bit in a little while too, but it's like, you mentioned it a little bit with the fatigue with the VO2. So like when you get to later stages in the step, right, there's some embedded fatigue there.
Mm-hmm.
And then also the starting wattage and the jumps, whether you're doing 10 watts or 20 watts, or it's like all these little things can have an impact on the results of the test. And that's something I've started realizing over the last like few months as I've started doing more tests and stuff. It's just like, yeah, it's kind of crazy. And so it's like, my point being that at the end of the day, we're just trying to, regardless of how you're doing it, whether it's lactate or VO2 master or whatever, like you're trying to get in the ballpark, and there's going to be like a plus 10 to 20 watt, difference, that you have to like just assume that it's in there.
Yeah. Yeah. And then that's going to change on a day-to-day basis too, because the way I do my testing weeks is I do my performance markers early in the week. So then there's presumably some level of fatigue. Oh, and then during the testing week, we also had New Year's in the middle of that. So we went to a New Year's Eve party and like essentially stayed up all night too.
Yeah.
So like, so there's some level of presumed fatigue that then happens when I do the ramp tests, towards the end of the week. So the reason why I actually like doing it like that is because there's not many times in training where you're coming off of 2 days of complete rest and you're just totally not fatigued whatsoever. So I would rather have lower estimations and then give myself ranges that say, okay, well, like during your threshold workout, this could be 280 to 320, for example. Like if my threshold was 280 or 300.
Yep,
and
exactly.
I had just done a cycling threshold workout where I was able to average 300 for 3 minutes with 1 minute rest. So, so that's also indicative that, okay, well, maybe on that day it was a little bit higher. So yes, that's what I always tell people is like, we're doing physiological testing to get an estimate in a controlled environment to see how things are changing over time. And then what we're going to do is we are going to use ranges of target power output, target RPE, target heart rates to see where you're at on that given day.
Yeah.
And that's also been really helpful for me because then it gives you the okay to be like, oh man, my legs feel kind of heavy today, but I can still get a good effort in here. So 280 it is.
You kind of experienced that the first week where you had some pretty ambitious targets.
Yeah, we were like, oh, we're going to do 5 repeats for the VO2 Max bike. And I got to 3 and I was like, no, that's not going to happen. And now it's actually just been 3 because I found that is enough where I feel like I'm getting some decent work in without, going overboard, because that's the game we're playing is we're playing this game of, well, what's enough to elicit adaptation without going too far and allowing you to just be like a human as well, because there's some workouts, right, that if you see them on paper and you're like, okay, that doesn't seem too bad, but then you do them and you're exhausted the rest of the day.
Well, and in my experience, I think the quote unquote type of athlete impacts that as well. Mm-hmm. Like oversimplification, but right, like a fast twitch athlete versus like a diesel that I would, like different types of workouts are going to impact them differently. And like for some athletes, doing sub-threshold work just wrecks them and makes them super tired. And
that's actually, I think that's me actually, because when I do like come back and do my like zone 2 work, I actually almost feel more tired sometimes if I accidentally go to like, like if I'm at the upper end of zone 2 for the entire time, I'm like, oh man, feels like I'm pretty exhausted. Like it's not that day. It's like the day afterwards. Yeah. But I can do, like the VO2 Max stuff has just been working really, really well for me. And then I'm like, okay, now I can just take it a little easy, Wednesday and Thursday, because I do zone 2 work on zone 2 and active recovery work. I'll put both of those together on Wednesday and Thursday. And then I follow that up on Fridays with a threshold workout. And because I had been increasing the speed at which I was running uphill, it's my left Achilles tendon, is kind of feeling it a little bit. So I've been kind of bouncing back and forth between like bike and run. And what I found, and this is, I think what I'm going to do going forward is I'm going to do half of my threshold workout. They're like the first set, like 5 by 3 minutes on, 1 minute off outside. And then I'm going to come in and I'm going to finish up the rest on the bike, just so I can have a little bit more of that threshold stimulus without, being, running too much, at least until the Achilles kind of, like not fixes itself, but, the rehab and stuff that I'm doing for it, kind of rectifies things.
Yeah. And then as far as next steps, I think, like you said, the race isn't till May, so you've still got plenty of time.
Right.
Like if it was closer, like if we were talking the race was in like February or March, I would say now would be a time to like transition and start to do more race specific stuff and really like start to extend that. And like you said, do threshold and stuff. But it's like, because you're still experiencing gains in VO2, it's like, let's hammer that for another 6 weeks and see what happens, Yeah.
Yeah. My newest thing that I'm adding is the 4th interval, going up the hill. And then, so I'll do that. And then, I'm playing around with the hard start intervals where I try to maintain like 400 watts for X amount of time. And then I kind of, go back down. And the reason for that is because during my 3-1, limiter assessment, I've been identifying that my respiratory system is limiting, and I just simply don't want to do, just sit down and do respiratory training. So I want to stimulate the hard breathing in the beginning of that, and then try to work through it. And it's just something that, I've identified that I need to do, but at the same time, time is a thing that, as much as we say we want more of and other things like that, I just don't want to make more time, to sit down and do 30 minutes of breathing exercises, during a day.
Yeah. That would cut into your second job.
Yeah. My first, second, third jobs. So,
well, awesome. Thanks for the update. I guess quickly, I know you talked about it a little bit. So what were the big changes you've seen so far? You talked about your times getting faster. You talked about the doing 400 watts for 5 minutes on the bike. So like, is it different than you expected? And are you surprised by the results so far?
No, it's, it's everything that I talk about on my podcast as well, as consistency, specificity, and progression. And it really is one of those things consistency is so important,
I know. It's
for
the number one
improvement.
thing.
It's absolutely insane. Like we've now stitched together 12 weeks, maybe 13 or 14 weeks of consistency. And it's just insane. I'm feeling, probably more fit than I really ever have. Some of the other big changes that I've really made are I've been doing monthly blood testing with this company called Rhythm Health.
Yeah. How's that going?
It's interesting. There's a lot of things that I kind of need to unpack with it. But one of the big things that I first noticed was my vitamin D and my testosterone levels were pretty low. And that was most likely due to, just always having low vitamin D levels. So I was supplementing pretty heavily with vitamin D, brought that up about 30 or 40% in the first month. That's helped me to feel more energized, to get better sleep. My testosterone has doubled in that time as well. And I've also been eating more. So I did another thing that I do is a resting metabolism test just to see how many calories I need to be eating per day. And it was kind of in the back of my head, oh, maybe I'm not eating enough. And sure enough, I was eating 2,800 calories, which is still a decent amount of calories, but I really need 3,600 to 4,000 calories a day. So I started eating more, and I've gained maybe 1 or 2 pounds over the course of 12 weeks. But my VO2 max has also gone up 10%, so I'm not too worried about that. However, one of the markers that's a little weird is that my LDL is actually kind of high. So I'm kind of working through that right now. And I don't know if it's because I am eating more, like, essentially overeating in a sense, because that does have a tendency to raise LDL. But at the same time, I also have genetic markers that are raised that are like, oh, you have, genetic risk for atherosclerosis and other things like that. So that can be a little dangerous, even though I have a really high VO2 max, which is, again, correlated with cardiovascular health and reduced risk of all-cause mortality and all that sort of stuff. So that's one of the main things that I think has been a huge game changer, is just eating more in terms of performance and energy and getting stuff done and staying motivated and all of that. It doesn't it really, one of the things that I just keep going back to is I'm just like, I do feel really fit and my numbers like match all of that. And everybody I talk to, they're like, yeah, you're really fit. But at the same time, I feel like I'm an imposter or something like that. I'm like, I'm not actually that fit. But I just say, yeah, well, my performance is going up. Like, that's not a fluke because you've stayed consistent, and it's really cool. So I'm going to need to reevaluate and be like, well, what's my next, maybe it's a 5 minute, or maybe it's a 10-minute, power goal that we, kind of go to, because that will get us closer, towards the, the race specific sort of stuff. Or maybe it's a 15-minute one. Do you have any suggestions on like, I like the idea of just keeping the 5-minute test, but maybe changing it to like an 8-minute one or 10-minute or something like that could be useful at this point.
Yeah. I think obviously it's not going to be the same test because but as we get more specific, it's like having that goal. I'm always a fan of like reverse engineering things. And so thinking about like, okay, you held 400 watts for 5 minutes. So like, okay, what percentage of that can you hold for 30 minutes? And then like see that go up, and like, but breaking it down to chunks where it's like, okay, maybe you start with 10 times 3 on 1 minute rest. And then that becomes, 10 times 4 and then 6 times 5. And eventually it's just one long 30-minute block.
Right.
At that, Right. So.
Yeah. That's kind of what I was thinking and imagining too, is like I see, like we started with like VO2 max stuff, and then I just see everything kind of morphing and changing until we hit like a point where it's like, yep, you're going to do a 35-minute race right here. And that's where, you do like the one continuous 35-minute interval, or, like maybe it's your second one or something along those lines. And that's the cool thing, is we have essentially like 3 or 4 more testing rounds, to kind of keep, manipulating and switching that. And I think, maybe we'll make a little bit more of a drastic jump after this next block, in a sense, to be, okay, well, we've already established, Phil's got a high VO2 max now. So now we got to bring that second threshold up, across the board. So maybe it's 2 threshold workouts and 1 VO2 max workout or something along those lines.
like VO2 maintenance.
Yeah. VO2 maintenance workout on a Friday, and then threshold, sort of style sort of workouts Monday and Tuesday. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. And I just want to point out, I think a lot of times where like athletes will come to me, and they're thinking about hiring me, and it's like they've got a race in 3 months or something like that. And what I'll tell people, or people will say, oh, when's a good time to start with you? And it's like, my answer is always, more time is always better.
Right.
To an extent, like we don't want it so far out that you're getting burned out and stuff, but it's like, a lot of times people don't have this, this opportunity because they have a race coming up. And so it's like, you're trying to quickly move through things, but it's like this opportunity to like, the sky's the limit. We can just keep working the VO2. And then once, like what I would expect the next one, we're going to see some diminishing returns. So let's say you jumped up 10%. So maybe next time it's going to be like 3%.
Right.
And the time after that, if we kept doing it, maybe it's going to be more like 1%. Mm-hmm. So it's like shifting that. And like you said, it's like thinking about, if we're talking about the power curve or the pace curve, just like shifting our focus from the left end a little bit more to the right end, and pushing that out.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's ultimately what we have to do for, a threshold style race as well. Like we don't have to go all the way to the right, side of the curve where it's like Ironman pace or something like that. But we need to really eventually focus on the development of, true like second threshold at that point. And we haven't seen really any movement in that. And that's to be expected because, when you're doing specific work, that's what you expect, specifically to be enhanced.
Yeah.
But the way that I view it is that if you're building a house and what I'm trying to do right now is make the roof as high as possible. And that's what VO2 Max is. And then the second floor is second threshold. So then what we're going to do is we're just going to try to push that shit as close to, VO2 Max as we get closer and closer to the race, because, the higher, percentage of your VO2 Max you can maintain, just the better outcome you're going to have, especially with a race that's, 30 to 40 minutes long.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's going to be right on the cusp of those two, the two systems is how I think of it, right? It's like where they overlap and stuff like that. But it's like, it's going to be kind of right smack in the middle there where you're kind of like pushing both of them to their limit.
Right. Yeah. And in the beginning too, like I think, or actually like the test that I just did, my second threshold running heart rate was still like, 88 or 90% of, my max heart rate, for example. So there's still not that much room for it to actually like go up at this point. So continuing to establish and build that up just a little bit more, will be good. And then, starting to really ramp up and get better at those sustained efforts is going to be, it's going to be tough, but because short punchy efforts, like I can survive through. It's just it's those like longer maintained, hard efforts. They can be pretty rough. But
you're in a good spot.
Yeah, we'll get there when we get there.
That's right. Where can people find you?
Yeah, so Dave and I have done a series of podcasts called Fast Physiology, where we dive deeper into all of this, kind of physiological testing, the science behind endurance performance and other things like that on my podcast called the Critical Oxygen Podcast. You can also catch me on Instagram at CriticalO2. That's really where I do a lot of, my answering of questions. You can get in touch with me if you want to do physiological consulting, or, interested in, coaching or courses or other things like that. Reach out to me there. And yeah, that's, those are the two places that are actually best. And then my website is criticaloxygen.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, and excited to see your progress and excited to see where you go from there.
Yeah. Thanks, Dave, for all your help. I really appreciate it. Definitely wouldn't be here without the wise words, from you, and, kind of reining in my ego every once in a while. Cause I think I really struggle with overestimating like what I can do in terms of training. And that makes it so I get, have a propensity to get injured and other things like that.
Yeah. My pleasure. Awesome. Until next time, take care.